No game can be truly great in experience and feel without a functional and appealing UI. If the art and animation in games are equivalent to the contents of a book, then the user interface is comparable to the typography, layout, and the meaningful presentation of visual materials. Today, we uncover the art and psychology behind game UIs with a very special guest who has mastered it all. Let's check it out. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to have here Gon Vasquez, an old friend of mine from Barcelona. Gon, how are you doing? It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, man. So happy to be here. Such an honor. Already a fan of the podcast, and yeah, I've been a fan of your work for years. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks a lot. Same goes for me. Can I start with a little introduction about you, just for the people who are meeting you for the first time?
Yeah, please. I think that would help a lot.
All right. So Gon Vasquez is from Madrid, from Spain. He's currently working at Supercell as a UI UX artist on Brawl Stars. And Gon has previously worked for Rovio in the puzzle studio in Helsinki. And when he lived in Barcelona, he worked for Social Point and B Square. Gon has made his first mobile game, which was Angry Boo, a platform game which was launched in January 2012. So it's a long journey going overall, working as an artist, working as a UI artist. And in today's topic, where I want to understand the art and psychology of UI, you are the perfect person to talk about this. So very excited. Welcome.
Thank you. I hope to be that perfect person to be talking about UI.
Thank you. So, Gon, initially when I discovered the work of UI in games when I was working, things have gone very far today. Like the companies are huge, like those which are doing great business, operating a live function. So there's like a whole process where you have to be in a specialized role, and there's like a big UX design process if you think about from the specialization. So I want to understand from you, like on your portfolio on Behance, you have a really cool diagram of a typical UX design process that starts from agreeing on the objectives and key results, and then going to asset creation, validating them, even checking those results with the audience. So could you describe all of these stages for the audience who are just new to this function?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, maybe like the first thing to help to clarify is we talk about UI, we talk about UX. I try to understand UX, like user experience, as a broader endeavor that we all collaborate with when we do a game or when we do any other product. So yeah, like designing the experience, the product or the game needs to provide to the users or players. That's what user experience is, and then UI, like user interface art, is just a bit of it. But yeah, like so in a way, user experience it's a way more shared responsibility inside a game team. But it's nice to have someone who is constantly taking a look at it. I like to be the one in terms of like UI and UX being connected. Doesn't need to be. There's companies that have the role totally separated, and then there's UX designers and UI artists. I've been working in this kind of like hybrid role for a long time because it just fits my personal preferences, but it can be done by different people. And then like this UX design flow that I have tried to visualize in different projects. Yeah, like I like to say, like the first thing is we need an agreement. No, we need an agreement between the different stakeholders of the project, like say the game lead, game designers, game artists, game programmers as well. So yeah, what are we trying to achieve with a specific effort? Like maybe we're talking about the core gameplay, maybe it's a feature. But yeah, we need to start from somewhere, and I think it's better if we start with an agreement of what's the focus, what's the goal of the feature that we are about to develop. Do we want to impact more like the retention of players staying for longer playing in the game, or do we want to impact how good the first time user experience is, and how well do players actually learn the basics of a game? So yeah, like this first we have called these different ways, like agreeing on the KPIs, agreeing of a shared goal. But like definitely some conversations need to happen before we start working. And then like I would say once we know what we want to do, I like to start like to research a little or as much as possible. Like depends also on the timing. But like trying to understand, like, do players have specific expectations of this kind of feature that we are working on? Like, have they faced a similar feature in another game? Are they familiar with how this is supposed to work on their minds? Would we be disrupting that? If so, is it good that we are doing something different than others, or it's better to lean on the universal knowledge that our players already have? And then so this might refer more as like maybe benchmarking other titles, but it's not only that. Like we can do actual like user research that I love that we get the opportunity to do, like ask players, like either in surveys, there's many different ways, like interviewing them, to start to understand, okay, like this thing that we are trying to do, how does it relate to our potential players, and then maybe almost at the same time, and also if we can then show to the interviews or to the research groups, it's like we will start already doing like some early wireframes, early flows, like to actually start to assemble a structure on how this feature or this goal that we are trying to do looks like. No, like and for that, it's common that we would use like these very basic representations of the game. They don't need to look clean yet or polished. It's just like the basic functions of what we are expecting to have on the screen while this flow is running. That would be like the wireframing phase. Also, that helps a lot to someone needs to be doing that. Normally, like a UI UX designer, and then the moment you have it, like you start need to send this and to share it with the rest of the stakeholders, like to see if we are actually following the vision that we agreed on with the game designers. Also to check with game developers as early as possible, like how complex is this going to be to develop and to actually do the programming. This wireframing phase helps to start envisioning like the actual feature, no? And then it helps both inside the team and maybe outside the team if we want to share with potential players. And then, like I would say, once we have agreed on this core structure or this like basic skeleton of how it's going to end up, so before putting the flesh and the skin and the beautiful parts of the beast that we are creating, once that is agreed, is okay. Maybe we will then like kick off the feature, and then it's when maybe like UI art is starting to be produced. We go maybe for more elaborate mockups. We start to think of how is it going to be animated? What are the other requirements we need for the feature? Let's say, do we need specific sounds for it? Do we need would it be nicer with some VFX? So maybe we can call our VFX artists to help us. Do we actually need any, for example, any character? Like maybe for a first-time user experience, it's nice if there's a host welcoming players to the game. So what character should it be? Like we will be talking with the character artist or the concept artist. So I think that's when we start to actually flesh out the details. Once the wireframes are agreed and when we are going more into the detail, and also when we start to implement in terms of the different engines that we are using to actually build the game. And then once that is done, or it starts to be done in terms of probably it will go into different iterations. it's very typical that you need to get like something pretty done to receive maybe more specific feedback, which is okay because sometimes it's hard for people to imagine how something is going to look with just like a black and white wireframe. So ideally, you should give yourself enough time to, once something is implemented, to iterate on it and to receive feedback, to show to maybe other members of the team that they haven't been so related to the development of the feature, so you get some fresh eyes. And then, if ideally also people from outside the team. And then once you start to see like the people are reacting to the product that you are doing in the desired way, and they don't find hiccups or like blockers in terms of, hey, which is the button that I should be pressing now, these kind of things, or this feels boring, like this feels too long, I'm not excited enough, like all these things, like it's ideal, like we work on them, and then like it's time to actually test it with players, and it depends where are you in terms of, are you a live game, so you can maybe launch it in the next update. Maybe you want to launch it only for a certain amount of players, so you do an A/B test. Also, maybe you're just doing a prototype, so then it's easier in terms of you don't need to be mindful about current existing players. And then I would say that's when also like another big bulk of learnings come, and you are then ready to do like a V2 of the feature in terms of, okay, like we thought of all about these things, we researched, we talked among us, but still, once that thing was out, different feedback came, and do we want to act upon it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. So it's great to see that you involve yourself in the entire pipeline, from agreeing on and aligning on the key results that the entire the game team is expecting, and then taking that up from determining the rightful flow, and then creating those wireframes and doing the actual hands-on work of art creation and asset creation, even implementation. Like in some places, maybe the implementation might be carried out by tech artists who are separate, but in some cases, maybe the artists are directly working on the engine and putting them by themselves. And then you also keep and watch on how those things implemented and then gave results when they were tested with the real audience and the feedback that came in. So very interesting to know that. Now I want to ask something more focused on the part where the UI is getting created, and then those decisions with the stylistic decisions are being made. So in the middle of the process where the art gets created. So I kind of like broadly see game UIs as either more generic or more thematic. So a generic one might be more flexible, easier to navigate and use, and more adaptable to the game. Whereas a thematic one could be something that feels very consistent overall from the rest of the game, like the visuals, the characters, the scenes. But maybe it might be a bit too thematic, like the pop-ups are very populated with the look and feel. So let's say you're doing a bit like a jungle game or whatsoever, so there are lots of ornated element, like thinking from the actual pop-up window to the play button to the header on the top and stuff like this. So it like basically requires more effort to create every pop-up like this, in my opinion, but it makes all the visuals and narratives speak one strong language. Is that correct? Like there are, can I classify them into something which is very generic and very thematic? And in what circumstances should one prefer one direction over the other? And what are the pros and cons of choosing things like these?
It's a great question. I mean, I think like it all comes to the user experience in terms of what is the experience that we want to provide. Does the UI help by being more themed to achieve that goal of maybe immersion, or like there's many other things that are taken into account here, like does it help in the readability, how long do we want the player to be looking at a specific UI screen, is then maybe that would help to decide how complex or how simple it needs to look. uh, Also depending like how heavy your game is in terms of information being shown to the player. No, maybe like more like hardcore game with tons of stats and different points of information about your player or your character or your years, then you need a lot of room for all that information. So maybe those ornaments will collide or will compete too much in terms of like real estate on the screen for that. But then at the same time, like sometimes we do need like to give some flavor to the UI, and so I think as you know, like nothing is black and white in when creating art or when creating like any design. So I would say it needs to be a balance in terms of how much does it help to have like a very ornamented UI towards the experience, the readability, like the and there's other considerations to have like how scalable it is. Not like will it be more costly then to do more variations of a certain screen if it's like too ornamented or too detailed? I don't have like a particular preference. I think as anything in UI, everything needs to serve a purpose. So yeah.
And let's go to the early days of the project where a prototype has been approved and greenlit, and you are beginning with the pre-production, and all the artists are the art director, and everyone is trying to align it on a vision for the look and feel for the game. So I know that on the art and VizDev side, you might explore to start making maybe some key art examples of wearing styles where you're testing out the difference in color schemes and the proportions and trying to define how simpler or realistic we're going to make. So does the same goes for also the journey of UI style selection in the beginning, like the typical flow of creation where you try multiple mockups, which are more like almost like you can ship them to the game, and that kind of like colored, rendered, and all those things, and then they are presented to the stakeholders. And in those cases, how are those decisions also made? Because maybe even the style is not set right now. So how do we decide whether this is going to work eventually for us?
Yeah, I think ideally you should start with this like UI exploration or style exploration specifically. Let's try to choose a couple of screens that are going to be very representative of the where the player is going to spend time on. So I don't know, like don't choose like an info pop-up that is only going to be seen once or twice. No, let's try to use something like the core gameplay or the main menu. Places that are going to be relevant in terms of the experience of the player. And then once you have like these couple of screens like selected, I think it's nice if we can try to explore. We don't have to be mindful about the whole production of dozens of different screens. Once you have only a couple, then it's nice to provide the rest of the stakeholders with options in terms of how you actually envision the game in terms of the UI. I think tons of conversations need to happen with the rest of the art team in terms of how the UI is going to actually blend with the rest of the art in game, so it doesn't collide, so it complements each other. And then once you have that, like you start. So in it, like I have run also experiments like also just testing UI styles with players. For example, in a project at Rovio, we were doing like a not yet released game. So what we did is like we saw like with a in-game survey, we saw like different styles of the UI for players of an already existing game. I think it was in Angry Birds 2 or one of the titles that they were already out. So we, in a way, wanted to see how the Angry Birds fans would react to a particular new UI style for a new Angry Birds game. And yeah, we provided different mockups. Like I think it was like a set of three, like A, B, C options, and yeah, that helped a lot. But yeah, like it depends also who do you want to get information from in terms of that feedback. The same can be done like with the team. No, like yeah, you create three sets of styles. Like I would say at that phase, if possible, try to go for extremes. Like not to go for something that is almost the same as A but B. Like yeah, like maybe style takes that on from your point of view or what you are understanding that the game is going to be makes sense, but still try to be as extreme as possible to see, okay, so can we go, let's say it's an action game, so do we go for like cartoony action, do we go for like realistic action, or do we go for maybe something more neutral where the action is actually expressed through other means and not the UI.
Mhm. Got it. And at this stage, do we think about the long-term efficiency of the direction that we are choosing from the point of view, like let's say when we are trying to define the look of the art, like how the characters are going to get done and things like this, there are considerations about when this game scales up, can we hire the right kind of character designers from the market to come and scale this game, and all the technical limitations also. So does the same thinking also goes in the mind when we are thinking about choosing a UI, like for example, more multiple artists are going to work on it, so can they adopt to the style that way? And also maybe in the initial markup you are thinking a bit minimal because of the amount of information you have, but at the end it's going to get very crowded with the number of features on, let's say, the home screen, and it's going to get have like tons of new events and features and whatnot. So how are those things still kept in mind while you are doing in a very early days when it's like something being born?
Definitely it needs to be in the team's mind, like how is this going to be like once it's a final product. Because yeah, like it does get like fully packed in the end, like tons of buttons calling for the player's attention. So it definitely helps if the UI style is not adding noise to that noise that by default is going to actually happen in game. No? But maybe at the early stages, it is nice trying not to be too constrained, but those kind of realistic limitations when we are talking about exploring, because maybe then there's a way, like we have seen something like, oh, like this way of rendering like the windows and the containers of the information. We like this. We see like it might be challenging to take this into like a broader scale. But maybe there's some details that we can take from it, or some like a simplification of that exploration that it actually works. No? So so yeah, I would say during the exploration phase, let's not to limit ourselves. Of course, it would happen in terms of we are mindful of the kind of project that we are doing. So I would say some limitation is going to be already happening on your mind, but maybe try to challenge that at least now during the exploration phase. And then, yeah, like once you see, okay, this kind of direction is the one that we want to go for because it resonates with the people we have shown to, it resonates with the team, it fits the rest of the things that are going in the team in terms of, like the other art or how we are going to develop the game. And then it's like, okay, what are the challenges of this particular style in terms of actually making it into a real UI? Yeah.
Got it. So all makes sense, and I agree to like you have to keep some stuff in mind, but don't be too blocked by all the limitations, because this is the moment where you need to unleash your creativity a bit and then play around and go a bit more broader with your solutions. Otherwise, like all the options that you're going to create are going to look too restrictive and limited, and won't be as free as something having a uh, the charm and value inside it. So it all makes sense. one thing which I want to know from, so I know your role and what your background has been, but help me understand more from a typical senior UI artist, maybe not working at Supercell, but all the locations and all the kind of like gaming companies. In those cases, every UI artist, like, is that role like a T-shaped role in one way or the other, where you are primarily responsible for UI asset creation, obviously, but you also need to apply and have the ability to think from a product and designer perspective, and also on the management side, and check on KPIs? Or can there be just very defined, you go and make UI art and then we are taking care of rest of the stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a lot on the company, as you were saying. It depends a lot on the size of the team, like how specialized you can actually be. Um, but I would say, even if you are, let's say, you are not doing the UX, like you have UX designers taking care of that. Even if you are not doing the implementation of your art, and then you have like technical artists doing that implementation. Both things what I currently do, like, because I do like to have all of these responsibilities gathered. Um, but even if you are only focusing on the UI art, I would say, yeah, it's maybe it's ideal that you know enough animation to do the animation of the UI components, the animation of the flows, buttons, like the different, like, let's say, like a level up animation or a booster animation in the UI, like all of those things. Yeah, of course, you can also count on animators to help you there. But uh, yeah, like, it's, I haven't yet been maybe some AAA games do have this super like divided responsibilities. But even when I was just doing the UI art of the game, it wasn't only like doing like the visuals of each screen like statically. So yeah, like, it's like there's tons of different skills that you need to put in use, like the use of the typography. Maybe you won't be designing the typography. You can also be designing a new typography for the game. So that can happen. I wouldn't maybe suggest to do that as one of the, because it's a big effort to do typography that works in different languages and everything. But I've been there as well, like, or maybe we have been tweaking an existing typography. So it's another learning that it's interesting to have, or a skill to have. So yeah, like, let's say, yeah, animation typography, icon designing. No, I would say it's one of the biggest responsibilities of a UI artist. No, and maybe it's one of the ones that I enjoy the most. Maybe we can talk about that later. But yeah, like, in the end, you combine tons of different specific crafts when doing a UI. Yeah.
True, true. In that case, I'm asking this question more from the perspective of helping those people who are not even employed into the gaming industry. They could be students, they could be someone who is like yet to enter into a professional landscape. Uh, what's the career path to become a UI artist for those people? Does that happen by some sort of like an accident where you work in a game team and then you're doing everything and then you start to find interest in it? Or is that something which evolves from your initial professional upbringing, where you make certain stylistic choices or skill set choices? Like a game artist would probably like draw, make illustrations, and then choose this industry based on choosing between animation, films, or whatnot. In the case of UI, do they go into the path of like maybe working a bit in the app development or website design? Are those people who convert into becoming a UI artist? So is there a sort of like a recommended path on how to proceed to become a specialized UI artist, for example?
It's a great question. We keep talking about this when we meet like students, design students, art students, or junior roles. I don't think there's a way, especially these crafts that are pretty new in terms of, yeah, when I was studying like UI, UX, they were not even things that you could study, So for my case, it did happen like more accidentally. I studied advertisement, then I was doing web design, then I joined a company that started doing app design, and we also wanted to do mobile games. And as I had like other interest in aside from pure like design, like illustration or animation, that's when I felt like all of those interests would be combined in mobile game UI. But there are some ideal um, uh, steps that you can take as you develop as a UI artist. Um, I would say probably if you want to become a game UI artist, the first thing that you should be is passionate about games. It's gonna make a big difference if you have played games. You know how games are done, how games communicate to players. So yeah, I would say let's try to start from passion about games, and then from there, maybe it's very important for us when we review portfolios or when we check on candidates. How would they approach challenges or design problems that we are going to be facing when designing a UI? And the best way to do so is like to see some examples of that. They doesn't need to be like from a real product. I would say do game jams that they always help a lot because it's like a very short amount of time, but you face the same problems that many real games are going to be facing, those challenges. So yeah, those exercises maybe they won't end up being in your portfolio, but they give you like confidence and practice, and maybe things that maybe they can actually end up in your portfolio. Why not? I'm not saying they shouldn't. If you think they summarize your current skills or experience. Other things that I always recommend is like maybe you like a particular game or a particular game genre, but you see like there are things that are not done as the way they should be done. Maybe it's a genre that has been developed years ago and there's no new game tackling on that. So maybe you can propose or even like revisit a game that is old. So how would it be like, taking like, let's say, Clash of Clans like was launched like more than 10 years ago. So maybe there's some passionate UI as artists out there that would like to propose how would Clash of Clans look if it would be done today from scratch. So all of these exercises helped a lot. And then the other bigger challenge is how to actually show that in a portfolio in terms of let's try to also reflect the process. Like not only show the final art of your UI, show everything. Like we want to see how you take decisions, how you represent them in a rougher wireframe. We want to see how you consider those particular UI screens, how they are going to be embedded into the game in terms of the flows. So yeah, it's also important like to learn how to explain a UI project from the outside and not only focus on the final art that someone's going to see on device. But yeah, those things are relevant.
Yeah. And what you said, the most interesting thing that I found from everything that you said was like you have to have passion for games. And that's something which I have seen the most common trait in UI artists. Even I could say it's more than the typical game artist working on a production. So I cannot recall any of my good friends who are really good in UI and they are not passionate about games and they're just working in this function and being successful. So a lot of those are just knowing the games, knowing the market, even like which games are performing better, the genre, the understanding of players, like those things exist a lot in those people as compared to maybe they can be game artists who like I'm passionate about character design and I like they still do great stuff for the game, but they don't have to really monitor about the games in general, the gameplay and things like these. So UI artists, I have found that they are constantly playing, they're constantly like exploring new game that came out, which is doing something unique, and navigating and learning from it. So yeah, completely agree. But what about artistic skills here? So is there any like weight and balance of artistic skills also in the UI artist profile? Like in your case, I know that you can draw very well, and that way you might have managed to make your mock-up vision with placeholder visuals even done by yourself. But do you think that the ability of game artists, like that kind of like drawing abilities, matter when you are thinking about a UI art design role?
I would say it does matter, at least on a certain level. It helps a lot if the UI artist has good drawing skills in terms of, like, because in the end, at least the icons and other visual elements, you might be the one actually producing them for the game. As said, like, it depends a lot on the size of the team. Maybe you can just be someone working on the layouts and even the icons you outsource, or you uh, share that task with someone else. But yeah, we were talking before about how T-shaped you need to be, and I would say that's one of the qualities or the skills that I would expect a UI artist has, like a good level of basic art understandings, like proportion, perspective, colors, color management, and how colors actually define, how they help to lead the attention. So, information architecture is also very important. So I would say it's a mix between what a typical graphic designer would need to know about, like as I was saying, like colors, layouts, information management, plus a certain level of 2D or even 3D art in terms of how you uh, create assets that are going to be embedded into the UI in terms of a currency, icon, some all of those things. Definitely, I think some art practice needs to happen.
Mm, mm. Understood. So you touched upon a bit about the the tools, like for example, being able to use a bit of 3D and able to draw and illustrate, maybe even have a knowledge of vector tool. I think becomes very important when you are really making something scalable and all that kind of like liquid design elements. What apart from these, like the typical graphic design tool, are there any specific tools which are part of UI and UX designer? Like, for example, are you more like an old school person planning all the stuff on a whiteboard or sketchbook with your function and flow? Or like I've seen many people use tools like Figma, for example, or XD Mockup. So those are the tools which also become a typical part of what professionals are doing today.
Yeah. Um, of course, when we value the candidate, which specific tools are you familiar with are not maybe as important as the final result, or as you're showing, as I was saying, like your way of thinking, or how do you approach design. But yeah, if we go into specific tools, definitely Figma is now, I would say, one of the best UI UX tools to be using. It has tons of advantages. It's super fast to create different flows, to manage like components that then once you change them for a certain screen, they apply into others. I would say, but I'm quite old school in that sense. Like I started doing UI just with Photoshop, and I still sometimes do. Like for example, if you are working on a live game, that is my case. I've been working in Brawl Stars for 3 years, so sometimes we are working just like an iteration of an already existing feature. So it's not that we are working on something from scratch. So in those cases, maybe it's fine if the few UI mockups required to represent what we want to change in that existing feature it's fine if you do those with some, you take some screenshots and then you paint over them with Photoshop. So I would say it depends a lot on the situation. Of course, if you are doing something bigger and from scratch, I would say Figma right now it's great because it allows you to 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 come up with something quite big pretty quickly. Um, but maybe for the final creation of the assets, I'm not yet used to do them in Figma. So maybe Figma it would be the place where we put together the different screens and how we design the flows. But the actual assets, I'm still using Photoshop and Illustrator because, me, I think they provide the best set of specific tools inside the software to create the assets, and that this is all just talking about the mockups and the assets, but then it's about how we actually implement them. There's also some tools there in the mix. Like, are you implementing in Unity? Are you using another engine, Unreal? For example, I use what it used to be Flash, like Adobe Flash, now called Adobe Animate. That's what I used to implement, and I love it in terms of it provides a lot of control in terms of the animations, of course, because it's originally just like an animation tool. And even it allows me to use vector graphics. The Unity, for example, at least when I was working in Unity, I couldn't have vector graphics. Everything needs to be like a rasterized PNG, or a GPG, like an image. No, but I love the fact that when using Animate, I can draw some simple shapes directly as a vector. So yeah, this is basically I'm describing what I'm using right now. So yeah, Figma for bigger projects in terms of designing the UI UX overall flow, Illustrator and Photoshop for the specific assets, and then using Animate to implement them. But yeah, I mean, Unity has great features as well that I've been enjoying in the past in other projects. Before Figma, I was using a lot Adobe XD. That in a way is pretty similar to Figma. Before that, there was a Sketch and some others. So yeah, as I was saying, in the end, the tool is just a tool. It's a mean for you to achieve what you actually are producing. But I would say those are the names that I should at least mention right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is true. So, Gon, you have worked on some very high-profile games which have high stakes and have delivered successful projects, like the games which have topped, like for example, Brawl Stars, or working on Angry Bird Dream Blast and things like these. Can we learn something from you from the mindset of your experiences or approaching these things from the psychology of creation of those work? Like, any tips and guidance that we can learn from the past projects and features that you've done work on, where you can inform me on how you think about the psychology of colors or the shape languages when you're working on them, and any do's and don'ts on the visual decisions on these kind of things that has an impact on either making the UI or breaking the UI, and also any cognitive psychology behind guiding the player's behavior to experience the feature flow in a certain way. So any trade secrets, basically.
I mean, I guess we could be talking about this for hours and do a whole series about a podcast about these topics, because I'll gladly turn all these learnings from secrets into shared knowledge, because yeah, nothing should be a secret when we are all trying to create good games. But yeah, there's a lot to take into consideration of the things that you just mentioned. Let's talk, for example, about the psychology of colors. So I mentioned before, there are some already pre-existing knowledge that us as players we do have in our mind, no, in terms of, let's say, it also depends a lot on the culture, no, and your cultural background, like where are you from, which are the games that you have been playing. But still, there are some shared uses of the color. I would say, like for example, red color. Red color, it tends to be related with an alert, or even like the concept of canceling. So yeah, if you are designing a button that is mainly its main purpose is going to be accept, I would say like maybe you would try to avoid the red color, and maybe you go for something that is more universally understood as accept button, like green, for example. Of course, maybe your UI style wants to be like breaking those conventions, and then maybe you go for a red color, but then it needs to be like a conscious decision. So it depends a lot in your audience, no? Like if you're maybe trying to appeal like a more casual audience, let's maybe try to lean more into this universal knowledge, and then if you're going for players that want to feel like more edgy, or that they are playing fresher games, or maybe more complex games, maybe then you can try to break those conventions. But I would say, yeah, only when you feel it doesn't compromise the experience. But then, for example, talking about red, red is a big color in some countries like China in terms of Lunar New Year. When you are celebrating, there's a lot of red. But then maybe it's not only red; it's like a combination of red and golden. No? That's like, and only that, like it helps a lot to create like some kind of festivity like feeling in your UI, which definitely matters for the live ops. The same as like we all have like certain Halloween colors in our heads, and I'm sure if you're working a live game, at some point you're gonna be doing Halloween themed assets. So yeah, like let's check on, okay, when you go out on the street during those days, how do you actually see Halloween? Do we want to create that same kind of feeling in the game? This like Christmas, no? Like there's definitely some Christmas colors, and some even not only colors, no, like shapes, all of those things that you might want to use them as your part of live ops effort, like when you're doing like a certain special event, or a new offer in your shop. So overall, yeah, try to be mindful of the audience that you are targeting to, in terms of do they live in this real world? Like, are they citizens of Earth? So as such, what are the how can we try to connect with that audience with the UI? So that it would be one of the things. In terms of working in a live game, another big learning would be trying to understand what has made that game successful in the first place, and trying to keep that in terms of the UI style, of course, but everything else. And as a last piece of advice, I would say try to be as open-minded as possible. I was just referring to how you need to lean on the real life matters. How can they impact your game? But it might be just like try to be mindful about different opinions in your team, because probably even the ones that you don't agree with, there's some truth in those opinions, and even if those opinions like end up being wrong, maybe they can spark an improvement in the game. No? So yeah, that's my top advice. Like remove any kind of pride in your work, and try to be as open-minded as possible, and absorb as many different feedback to try to make the best of it.
True. I vouch for the same, and I believe, like you mentioned, because you're gathering feedback from the players. I think this might be influencing your work as well, isn't it? Like, for example, how to make your end result be accessible by all kind of demographics and the kind of players. So sometimes you are constantly learning about the player behavior, and even uh, like let's say you're thinking about from the mindset of an experienced gamer because you have been working on game, but you have to tend to also think from the POV of how a first time user is still experiencing and launching the game today and then playing around. So I believe like you also keep in mind a lot about this accessibility as well for any kind of person playing it, more or less from the target group still, but um, even maybe I don't know some uniqueness like color blindness or left-handed, right-handed, or playing on the couch and having full focus versus being in a metro and then having to deal with so much of stuff while they are trying to navigate. So I believe like so many of the discoveries also come into play as you make your decisions about how to approach your work, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like it's part of like at Rovio. I worked in a UX Bible, and some of the considerations that you have just mentioned, they were there, like accessibility being one of the most prominent ones. Um, Things like, let's say, in a way, I'm biased, so most of my questions or most of my answers are going to be leaning towards like mobile games, but maybe that's where I can provide more expertise. So in that sense, like when working on a mobile title, no, it's gonna be like it's a landscape game that you are seeing when handling like the phone with your both hands, like holding the phone with your both hands, or it's like a portrait game where you can just be using your phone with one hand. But then that determines a lot of different decisions in terms of the UI layout, how easy it is for your thumbs to access that specific button, how covered that area of the screen is going to be by your fingers, most probably. And then yeah, like in a way we try to have like this kind of like map in our heads when we design these screens. So okay, where are the fingers going to be placed, and where your vision is going to be covered by those.
Got it. So my next question is about uh, the challenges in evolving UI for ongoing games. So I believe it might be challenging, especially when a lot of content has already been created. Have you ever dealt with a situation in any of your past project where a game required major UI or UX overhaul? And in those cases, how does the running train of production deal with it? Like, do you allocate a separate time to fix everything from the past and apply the new style to every new feature which are currently getting created? Do you have any memories of any moments where you handled such kind of UI pivots?
Yeah, um, I do have those kind of memories, and yeah, like they are definitely challenges to face. I would say it depends a lot again on the how noticeable is going to be the change for the player, and how maybe how easily can still those two, like the old style and the new style, how can they coexist? Can maybe they can't. Um, so if they actually can't, maybe what we would try to do, especially in a live game where we have a schedule and we need to keep releasing content and features, so we would probably work on the overall UI art restyling as a separate side task, maybe even during different update cycles. So we know that maybe at the end of the year we want to actually implement that big restyling, but we cannot be idle in the meantime. So we would try to split our efforts in terms of we keep providing the live content that the game requires, and at the same time we start developing the new UI art style. Um, and then of course there's like the pain needs to come at some point, and yeah, like there's a moment where maybe that specific update cycle needs to be actually more focused on the implementation of the UI art restyle, and then maybe it needs to be leaner in terms of actual new content. But yeah, of course, ideally that would happen in a way that for players is not that noticeable in terms of they are getting less content in that update cycle, because in a way the UI art overhaul, like it might look better, but for most of the players, it won't be perceived as that you are bringing something to them or something that for them it's just going to be okay. The game is now looking different. Maybe some are going to be even annoyed by the fact that you have changed some of the style of the game. So yeah, ideally it wouldn't compromise like your constant like a stream of content for them. Yeah. And like, for example, in Brawl Stars, what we have done is like maybe we are trying to revamp one feature at a time, because that, I would say, allow us like to have that balance, no? Like we keep providing new things, but we can focus on a particular feature that it's been done quite a long time ago, that we have been like collecting feedback about it. We have been collecting ideas that the team has, like it would be nice if, for example, we are about to relaunch the Brawl Pass in Brawl Stars. It's something that we have actually even announced players before it actually happens. The big change is going to happen in January, but we have communicated those changes a couple of months earlier from that. And yeah, we are trying to do as many changes as we think the feature needs all together. So if the player needs to relearn some details about the feature, let's try to make it as a in a holistic view. Like we try not to change only one detail and make it all consistent. So I would say that's a nice approach in terms of, okay, maybe changing the whole UI of your game is quite a big endeavor, but maybe you can go one feature at a time. As long as the restyling actually allows to have older and newer style features.
Mm-hmm. Does your work involve a lot of negotiation or convincing, having to inform others about the bigger picture that they may forget quite often? And let's say if someone is asking for a certain route to take, and which can break something else. So do UI artists deal with situations where they have to defend the fort and being the protectors of usability or even visual language, for example?
Mm-hmm. It does happen. It does happen because I would say, as this whole craft of doing games is a shared effort between many different roles. It can happen that someone is pushing for, like, let's try to make an offer more noticeable in the main screen, but then maybe we are actually compromising like the main goals of the main screen, that is allow you to see where the play button is. No, so let's try not to cover like the play button with an offer. No, I'm just right now thinking in the Mike Wazowski example. Some of your previous podcasters provided. No, like okay, we need to be mindful, like not to cover main elements with others just because we want to make an offer more appealing during Christmas or whatever. So definitely some negotiation happens. I would say as long as you are able to provide the right counter arguments of why we shouldn't do that thing that had just been proposed, we should all be fine in terms of like there's like a common ground that is ideal that we find together. So it's like, I get it. Like we do need to make this offer more noticeable, but maybe there's other ways than just like reducing the accessibility to those core feature buttons. So definitely, it does happen. It needs to happen because, as I was saying, we all need to be constantly conversating about the goals that we have and how we want to achieve them. But yeah, probably accessibility is one of the things that we need to protect the most, or maybe the consistency across the game. So we don't represent visually something too different from one place of the game to another. Because in a way, that's our main responsibility. It's one of our main responsibilities as UI artists. Because maybe even someone has lost the reference, like how are we representing the home button in that part of the game, and it's ideal that you, as the UI artist, are the one who knows. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Gon, seeing you from the outside, at least it looks like that you have had a very, well deserved, but a fortunate opportunities where you work with really nice people and collaborators, which allows you to unleash the right way of working and having a great and standout UI art experience from the projects that you have been part of. But in some cases, in some team scenarios, like maybe the art directors, they are more on the art side and not even mindset with a product mindset or a whole game mindset. They can likely go a bit disconnected from giving the right value and attention to the UI. And in those cases, maybe UI can just feel like a supporting function rather than the actual true value that it can bring when everything is just coming together and the UI experience is supporting it. So what must art directors, game designers, product managers do differently in order to get the best execution and results from UI? Like how do those other function people work where people like you are able to unleash out the best experience on the game?
Great question. It's a great question. It does have a big impact, having the right partners in that effort, no? And how to find the best ways to complement each other and yeah. So let me think. In a way, um, in terms of game designers, no, or the people who are going to be helping you to shape a feature in terms of the experience of it, and maybe not as much in the visual side, but more on the rest of the elements of the design of the feature, like the information that we saw, the pace that the feature has in terms of how we introduce it to the players. So I would say, yeah, as I was saying before, conversations, communication, fluent communication, I would say is the best thing to ask for most of your stakeholders. No, so on the same time, I would say, as I was saying before, try to be open, no, because when you're focused on producing a certain screen, maybe you lose track of something that the game designer noticed. Hey, we should take this into account, and your current version is maybe not doing so properly. And it makes sense in terms of game designers. They are some most of the time the ones who have the bigger picture. Because they have the goal of the feature in mind, and maybe they are not as embedded into the actual crafting of the UI art. So that for them is an advantage that you need to make the most of. So try to keep sharing and try to keep listening to what they did say. But yeah, I would say try to trust each other, and then from that trust, try to get as much as possible from those different learnings that everyone has. And then in terms of the art directors, it's basically all of the things that I have just said that also applied for the visuals. But what I do feel that sometimes they have helped me most, an art director, is they know better about our art capabilities, in terms of who are the other artists that we have in the team, who are the vendors that we can lean to in terms if we need some external support. So I do appreciate, maybe I'm noticing, okay, this feature needs a lot of art. As I was saying before, maybe this feature needs, or this part of the game needs a lot of visual effects to make it pop, as we were saying. So then maybe ideally is the art director telling me, hey, like, like we have these VFX artists that they have helped us in this other part of the game. Even they are familiar with how they made it. How can we embed it? So yeah, like as we are all focused on our different crafts, and maybe you are focused as a UI artist in the creation of the UI art and the design of the experience, let's try to lean on those external stakeholders for the things they know best, and if they can help you with those expertise, is the best that you can ask for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. So that way, what are the most enjoyable parts of your role? I mean, I know from you that you kind of like do the entire process, and that's why maybe you like everything from it. But is there something which is like a specific section where you have the most love for, and you just enjoy doing that a lot? Like if I go and look at your Behance, for example, the tons of pins that you have done for Brawl, were those the ones where you had the maximum enjoyment? That like this is the creative playground and I'm gonna just have a lot of fun doing them?
Yeah, there's like this answer, I would say, has two parts. The first part is yes, I do enjoy every bit of the process, and that's why I like to be involved in the whole. So because sometimes what it can happen that you have spent hours or days or weeks doing a certain thing, no? Like let's say icon creation. So then it's quite a refreshment to have the chance to do something quite different. Like, yeah, let's design a new flow or animate those icons. So it provides a lot of variety to your daily experience as a worker. So yeah, I would say that's one of the things I enjoy the most about my work, the variety that it has. So in terms of the where you spend your hours, there's a lot of different things that you can be focusing on. But of course, there's things that they pop in my mind when you ask me for what I enjoy the most. I love icon creation, definitely. I love the fact that trying to represent the concept in simpler ways so it can be understood when seen in a small size and when seen without a lot of attention being focused on that icon. No? Some examples, like I love doing like when I worked in the Almost a Hero game. I think it's one of the first times I tackled like skill icons, like quite typical in games now, and also because we try to make them with some humor. So it's great trying to find the right way with as few details as possible to still communicate the content and even doing it with some charm. You mentioned Brawl Stars pins, like that's something that I inherited from Paul Chambers, the great artist that created the big bulk of the Brawl Stars IP and pins as well. I love working on pins. I love the fact that Paul created such a consistent language. So yeah, it's just like I learned to speak a new language, like the pin language. And of course, over the years, and as he hasn't been always around, as he moved to another project, I have had to create like maybe new expressions in that language or even new letters in that ABC that he created. But the fact that it was so defined and so visually powerful, it has helped me a lot to keep the consistency of it and keep the strength of it. So yeah, those, like, I love icon creation, definitely. Like even like I would say in Brawl Stars, probably the icons that I still enjoy the most are maybe like not as visually appealing, or even like they don't have the charm of the pins, because pins, they do have the charm of communicating an emotion. That is something like for a player is easy to establish a bond with. But yeah, like in Brawl Stars, every brawler needs to have a different set of skill icons and gadgets, like star powers, and those are like done with only one color or two colors. So yeah, when you just focus on the shape and just with the shape and communicating that specific concept, and still doing it with the style, so it also represents the brawler, for example. That is a task I love to do. Yeah.
Excellent, and I enjoy them visually seeing them. So I feel how fun it might be to create and ideate them and then ship them. My last question is more on the point of view of having a portfolio, like building an ideal portfolio. So, what are what does an ideal or exciting UI portfolio look like? You mentioned a few things, like including the process examples is helpful, like not just putting the final result. But many aspiring UI artists are currently working as generalist artists in some smaller studios. In that way, how should they organize and prepare for making a portfolio for more kind of like specialized role, or in companies like yours, like having a dream job to work in these kind of places? What are the things that you look for from many portfolios that you're reviewing that makes them qualified to move to the next stages?
Great question. And I think it's also a great way to summarize some of the things that we have been covering in our conversation. Because in a way, when checking a portfolio, I do want to find most of the things that we have been talking about in terms of, I want to see that you have a passion in games. I want to notice like you know how games are done and how games communicate to players more specifically. Maybe you still don't know a lot about the back end of creating a game, but I'm sure if you're passionate about games, you do know about how games look and how games are experienced as a player. So that's something that you need to be able to communicate in your portfolio projects. Even just like being mindful about how this game is going to be used, how this information is going to be read, how this flow is going to be experienced, because you are able to put in the shoes of the player. So that would be one thing. Then the other thing that we were saying, like let's try to be able to communicate the whole process in terms of how you came up with this idea for this portfolio project. Try to show your sketches, like your references as well. Why not? And then trying to also show the different stages, not only the final version of it. And then try also to be concise in terms of, maybe you need to have like a big portfolio or a very long scroll for your project. Maybe try to just pinpoint what are the things that actually make that project or that portfolio stand. I would say I guess that's quite a common advice. Many portfolio revisors can say. I'm sure you would say the same for character creation. Like, try to select always, and not to turn your portfolio into some kind of journey or journal. In terms of everything that you have done is reflected on your portfolio. And try to go back to your portfolio and every now and then, like, maybe this example is no longer relevant of my skills. And let's try to maybe check if there's a better example of how you actually now create icons or how you animate a flow. Maybe, maybe you have like an emotional bone with that project, but maybe that emotional bone is not as relevant to actually show your skills. And then lastly, maybe let's try to, as well as we were covering the process, let's also try to cover the final results in terms of maybe there's a particular animation that needs to be shown. Let's try to do it in the right way. Like, I love to see portfolios that include some animations because, as I was saying, animation is something that you will end up doing as a UI artist. Even if you don't do the final animation, you might be the one asking for the details of how the animation needs to be executed. So maybe you can also not show the animation, but show like the storyboards you created for the animators to actually achieve what you had in mind.
True, true. Something which you somehow said in everything, but I just want to emphasize on by adding a point from my side on this one. It's like very common for some people to just wonder on how do they assemble a portfolio or even create a portfolio when they did not have a hands-on experience of working on an actual project. Like they're trying to get the foot into the door and they're like students still. In those cases, I believe, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the best way out would be to just create a mock-up project for yourself, like just as a personal project. Maybe you don't need to have a whole exercise of designing it and also having developed it and playable or whatever, but you can just create something like a dribble project or behance project, which like maybe not gonna convert into an actual game, but for your portfolio reasons you can maybe even pick up another game which you are referencing as a like, let's say, your base, and then pick up the genre like a puzzle game, and then like I'm gonna make another one from my own portfolio, but I'll just retheme and reskin into another kind of setting, and therefore do my own versions of the home screen and all the pop-ups and stuff in order to assemble a portfolio without something that really exists as a game in the market. Do you think that that can work?
Yeah, totally agree. I would say there's three main sources of how you can build a portfolio without any kind of actual, real professional experience in a real game project. So yeah, as you said, like take an existing game and try to propose something different for that game, like trying to revamp the UI style, try to improve the experience of the first time user experience of that game. Yeah, like so. Yeah, taking an existing game as a base and then work on top of that. Maybe the second one is like, yeah, maybe try to imagine you are doing a game. Of course, then it needs to also, you are not only the UI artist, you are the whole game creator. But that might be interesting enough. Maybe you can try to do something that, like in terms of the game concept, it doesn't need to be too complex or too original, but at least it provides you like let's say you want to show your match three skills. So okay, I'm doing a new match three title. How is the UI going to look for that game? So yeah, like I call them like fantasy projects in terms of they are not real games. So yeah, maybe existing games where you work on top, fantasy games, and the third one is the one that I mentioned, like game jams, because I at least in my experience, I was able to take a game jam project. Maybe the final version of it that it appears in the portfolio is not the game jam result because as normally they are quite tight in time. But maybe from there you get the inspiration, and it's even like quite pleasing when you do a game jam, and then it's like, oh, if I would have had much longer time to work on that game that we work on the game jam, how would it actually end up looking, or how it would be the experience? No? So yeah, I think with those three, just with those three, like fantasy projects, existing games that you work on top, and game jam projects, like you have tons of feel like to actually provide nice examples of how you could perform in a real experience.
Yeah, excellent examples and great classification. I just love the way you split them into three things because that can show your skill set in all the three variety. For example, the one which was the fantasy one, it shows your ability to uh, develop a project, like work in a way where you are creating all the elements. So that's the best example of showcasing your skills. The other one is revamping. So it's something where your critical thinking and all your abilities of what you have learned and process from the game and discovered what are the flaws or what are the things which are not working, and even like picking up an older game and then what would it be like in today's modern way on how things have evolved. So what are the changes that you are doing? So showing your skills, showing your evolution, and then also showing your prototyping kind of like skills or a bit of innovation by working in these kind of game jams where there's a little magic of creating something unique rather than what exists in the market, and having some fresh look onto a completely different navigation. I think these three things can really grab the attention of hiring managers from UI and the recruitment studios. So excellent. Thank you so much, Gon. This was very, very fun and fantastic to have had met you today. I'm going to link you in the description for people who want to connect with you to get any advice and also your portfolio stuff and all. But thanks for spending this morning, and it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shira. And yeah, I'm always glad to help UI people like enthusiasts. Like doesn't matter like their experience. I often try to help. They contact with advice, asking for advice. So yeah, like I would be glad to receive some questions and follow ups to this conversation through that link. Yeah,
that's so nice of you. Thank you so much, Gon. Have a great day.
Thank you. Likewise.